great honor for me to introduce a winner of the GABA Excellence Award 2023, Professor Ulrike Malmendier. She is the role model for the German American Award of Excellence, I would say. And I'm not taking you through her 19 pages CV that I found on the Berkeley website. I'm not doing that. But a couple of facts I think that were very interesting to share with you. First of all, she's born in Cologne, Germany, pretty close to me, and she studied in Bonn. She has a lot of studies achievements, the Bachelor in Economics at the University of Bonn, a Bachelor equivalent in Law at the University of Bonn. We didn't meet that time, unfortunately. An MA in Economics at Bonn again, a Doctor in Law in Bonn. Then she went to Harvard University and had a Master in Harvard in 2000 and a PhD in Harvard as well in 2002. The university career is absolutely amazing. She was an assistant professor of finance in the Stanford University Graduate School of Business from 2002 to 2006. She then was an associate professor for economics at the Department of Economics of the University of California, Berkeley, UC Berkeley, 2008 to 2012. Since 2013, she is the Edward J. and Molly Arnold Professor of Finance at the University of California, Berkeley. That was only the professorship achievements. I left out like a very long list of lectures, of assistant professorships and everything, and fellowships. She is an amazing scholar. That's more than certain. But there's another thing that's very important, and this is one of the biggest achievements we had ever here, and for one of our award winners. She is advising Germany. Is it running? I don't know. You will see. She's advising Germany, and I took this title from a Berkeley publication on Professor Malmendier this spring. Some highlights. From 2013 to 2020, she was a member of the advisory board to the Berlin Social Science Center. Since 2016, she's a member of the advisory board of the Catholic Research Economy Discussion Organization. Since 2018, she's a member of the advisory board of the UBS Center of Economics in Society of the University of Zurich. Since 2020, she's a member of the scientific advisory board of the Leibniz Institute for Financial Research, SAFE, in Frankfurt, Germany. And since 2022, she is a member of the German Council of Economics Experts, Sachverständigenrat zur Begutachtung der gesamtwirtschaftlichen Entwicklung. This is something that's an amazing achievement, and we will talk about this a bit later, or the interviewer. These are the 5 people who determine what Germany will do next from an economic perspective. I hope they are listening to you, Ulrike. Why I'm saying this? Well, one thing, of course, I want to quote the Münchner Merkur in 2022 said, he had an article titled Im Olymp der Ökonomen, zu Besuch bei den 5 Wirtschaftsweisen. And I quote, Professor Malmendier lehrt an der renommierten Universität of California in Berkeley und gehört zu den am häufigsten zitierten deutschen Wirtschaftswissenschaftlern weltweit. It's an amazing achievement. What did you say about it? And I read the article advertising Germany, the interview with you, Ulrike, in Berkeley, and you were asked, how did you get appointed to advise Germany's government? Your answer, and I quote, it started with me writing an op-ed together with a colleague on why no self-respecting economist would ever join the German Council of Economic Experts. The next thing I knew, I got a call from the German Chancellery, then still under Chancellor Angela Merkel, asking whether I wanted to join the council. Initially, I declined. What happens after that and why you took the job, I think we leave it to the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the winner of the GABA Award of Excellence 2023, Professor Dr. Ulrike Malmendier.
distinguishes you from traditional economists?
Yeah, behavioral economics actually got started here in the Bay Area about 30 years ago at Berkeley. The first PhD class was taught by later Nobel Prize winners Kahneman and Akerlof. And the goal was to make our idea of human decision making, as we model it in economics and try to predict it and try to understand how people interact in markets, to make it psychologically more realistic. So traditionally, we're very proud that we know a little math and have beautiful models and like work out the equilibrium and so on, and that's quite useful to understand many markets. But what was missing is that the deviation from this perfect homo economicus, this perfect rational decision making, is not just white noise, it's quite systematic. So learning about overconfidence, cost fallacy, and so on turned out to be incredibly useful to understand mergers, investment decisions, and why we all sign up for a gym membership and then never go.
Yeah. It's not only about the numbers and the data, it's also about a lot of the human factor that plays an important role in our day-to-day economics.
Yes, that's exactly right. And of course, even economists are human, so we always knew that emotions and fears and misperceptions aren't, determine, like, have a huge influence on what we do from day to day. But we kept killing ourselves and thinking we can kind of ignore it. Some, deviation to the right and left, and really to understand how prices are set and what quantities are traded. At the end of the day, it won't matter. Turns out that was wrong. Bringing these more squishy factors into our mathematical statistical models turned out to be incredibly useful.
Let's talk about the country that you come from. You grew up in the Aachen and Cologne area, studied in Bonn. You've been living in the US for about 20 years now. What do you miss most about your European homeland, and besides Carnival?
Carnival is a thing. So when we spent a sabbatical there in Bonn, like the kids, I took them to all the events. But the bakeries, good baked goods. Actually, not just there's chains now, they're not as good anymore. But you can find the hardcore bakeries. But then also everybody knows how to bake good stuff. And so, that's maybe one big aspect. When people ask me about food, I actually typically answer Turkish food, right? Which is like the common go-to.
Döner.
Yes, döner.
You're German, your husband is from Italy, your 3 kids grow up here in the Bay Area. What is it like to be an expat in a multicultural household?
Well, let's put it the other way around. Conditional on being a multicultural household, it's wonderful to live here, right? Because there's so many of us that that you do not only speak 2 languages at home, but 3 is incredibly common. People, so when they go to their German afternoon school, Bucks, Bay Area Kinderstube, like the question is, okay, what's your 3rd language? And so you're not the odd one out. It's normal that you have a mix of cultures and identities, and it's a great place to do this. I have to admit that I often thought, we were talking at the table before, whether I can imagine to go back to Germany, and before I had kids, I was always thinking, well, for sure when I have kids, I want to go back, because lots of things about the school system and, which I don't want to expose my kids to, but turns out from multicultural family, which is a little different in many respects, it's quite pleasant to be here. And I think the kids actually made us more likely to stay here for the long run.
Are there any traditions that you have hold on to in your American life that you brought over from Europe and that you still stick to and keep alive and kicking?
I mean, well, for sure around the holidays. So we just had Easter, and I mean, I'm often totally appalled when I see American Easter egg hunts, like, the eggs are thrown there and everybody can see them. So for us, a sign of success is that 30% of the eggs are only found at Christmas, and so we're very serious about that. There's also the Italian side. one thing Italians love is to produce these humongous Easter eggs. So we import good Belgian chocolate, dark chocolate, get a form, and then fill in the liquid chocolate and produces humongous eggs, much to the joy of the kids. So yeah, I think around the holidays there's a lot. We're trying to keep up the languages so they're trilingual. And then the summer, I have to admit, we're typically found in Italy and Germany.
Let's talk about economics. What can US economic leaders learn from Germany and potentially, of course, vice versa?
Let me start with the vice versa, just because Kai Westerwelle mentioned my little tantrum I threw about how the German policy advising goes. Traditionally is done in Germany. What I really appreciate here in the US, I mean, particularly in my area, is this openness towards bringing in experts in different areas. So just talking about economics, right? So Obama becomes president. Next thing I know, he empties up half of my department over at Berkeley and brings them into all sorts of positions to Washington. And people are actually willing to do that, even though, you know, they care about their citations and publications. Of course, they drop the pencil and like go to Washington and work themselves to death and try to contribute a little bit to it. And we don't have that. We don't have that tradition in Germany, unfortunately. Part of the reason why I took the job is I'm hoping to change it. I think a lot of interesting changes are happening right now, so that's exciting. But this openness to let excellent come in, like independent of whether these experts will say what you want them to say, but really, you know, you're trying to learn. I think that's fantastic here. Bringing that to Germany more and more would be great. The other way around, what really strikes me, I don't know who we can attribute it to, but as still a big difference is when I look at the polarization of society. We do see it happening in Germany as well, but it is still, the cohesion is still like miles away from where we are here right now. And
why is that?
Sorry?
Why is that? Why do you think that is?
Partly certain mistakes, letting loose of certain forces that divide hasn't happened yet, may I say, you know? So there are always risks. I do worry when, you know, politicians there's the right, there's the left, and they start some conversations about, I mean, you've certainly followed this in the press about little pashas, and so like, I mean, I understand it's important to you know, talk about the frustrations of the population, but be careful what you let loose. And so that just hasn't happened as much in Germany yet. There's still something that holds us back, and that keeps us thinking about the cohesion and not maximizing their vision. I'm not sure how long it will hold. For now that's working out better. I also think, and you asked me why, but I don't quite have the why, but let me share an observation about Carnival, for example. When I was back in Germany and we in the Rhineland, and we, you know, had the Carnival season, the first season, and I would go to these events, I was really struck by how maybe, you know, the guy who's currently the president of the Carnival Verein, another one, Karnevalsverein, might be the guy who's taking care of the buildings and facilities at a school, and then his subordinate in the Karnevalsverein might be the principal of that school, right? There are some institutions where this mixing and matching is kind of like happening more easily. It's not all ideal, you know, there's lots of homogeneity of the society and so on, but the institutions where you come together and this separation, I go to my country club there and, you know, you're in this club there, hasn't quite happened. And so I hope this can be fostered. It doesn't need to be all around Carnival. It can be other themes, can be, you know, engagement for climate and environment and so on. So I'm sorry I'm not answering the question. I'm just seeing the institutions are still there. The will is a little bit stronger to keep the cohesion, and maybe that's something we can think more actively about here in the US to kind of try and fix what has happened there.
Kai Westerwelle quoted a conversation that you obviously had with former Chancellor Angela Merkel a couple of years ago, and you declined a job offer, and now it's the time to tell us why.
Yeah, so I guess this all came about a situation where I had actually gotten another nice award by the German Economics Association, and suddenly had to give a little speech. I hope that will not happen here tonight, that suddenly, without knowing, I had to give a little speech. And so I basically talked about this anecdote about Obama, as I shared before. I said, why is that not happening in Germany? Why don't we pick, in economics, the top minds to work together with the government and think about how to structure Industriestrom or Gaspreisbremse or, you know, whatever's going on. And so, somebody was sitting in the audience said, oh, let's write this up. And so that's what we did. And I really, I mean, to their credit, you know, they got in touch with me despite me sharply criticizing things. Why did I at the time think it's not a useful undertaking? Traditionally, the Wirtschaftsweisen, this Council of Economic Experts, gets a lot of attention in the press, in particular when the annual report is issued. And then they present their big fat volume of, you know, insights they have put together, often in an interesting language. And then nothing happens, as far as I can tell. I mean, you get a lot of press attention if you like to be, you know, at all the talk shows you can, very easily, they call you every week. But do you really change anything? And do you really bring to the table the newest methods, the latest data we have available? Do you initiate a movement towards making more data available to be able to help during the COVID crisis, during the energy crisis, knowing actually where the problems are? I didn't see that happening so much, and I didn't think that's apparently the place of this council. So at the time I declined, then COVID happened, and everybody was distracted. And then when the new chancellor called again, I declined again, but I remember in particular a couple of conversations I had with the chief of staff, with the chancellor, and others saying, look, Ulrike, one thing is to complain all day long, and the other thing is to actually try and change things. And it's a good moment right now. So there are other people on this council who had very similar intentions. You need a majority to make some changes, and we're making some changes. And so this hope, I mean, I was thinking at the time, big chance nothing changes, but I want to have tried. And I think it's working a little bit. So just this opportunity to maybe set Germany on a particular path in terms of economic policy advising is what really motivated me.
And then something interesting happened. In November, you contributed to your first report of the Fünf Wirtschaftsweisen, I think. And you were asked for advice, the government asked you for particular advice on energy prices and Energiepreisbremse, or if the government should take over paying the bills for German households for gas, and they followed your advice, right?
Yeah, that's quite something. No, but I mean, of course, I'm not saying that hasn't happened before, but I think not just me. I think a couple of people who are involved in policy advice, like some different generation, maybe also more, some other people who have been abroad and serving in different roles right now, maybe prefer to be in conversation, to be in the room when deliberations happen, and not just to criticize in the talk shows or via the media, and that can sometimes be effective. So I mean, knock on wood. I mean, who knows what happened? So I started this article you mentioned, this op-ed or however you call it. At the time I was totally praising the US. I was saying, here in the US, the CA gets the best people, and then they come back and tell me, oh, it was really great when Obama was negotiating about this free trade agreement, but didn't have all the facts about international economics right. I went into the room and gave a little explanation how things work. So I think I really helped to improve things. They come back very motivated, you feel they are in constant conversation. And so I say, that's what we need. Let's do what the CA is doing. Well, I made the Trumps here, but even if I take those out, if I take the Biden years, beginning of the Biden years, my colleagues have actually been quite frustrated. Access to the White House has been really hard. They felt like economists haven't been heard a lot. It's really hard to set this in stone that this happens, right? There needs to be willingness from both sides to be in conversation. And I think right now it's a good moment in Germany, but I'm afraid I can't say I found out the recipe how to do it.
But the government, for example, listened to you guys when you suggested, hey, there should be some incentive for the public to save more energy, which is a topic that is far more important in Europe than over here.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience. So just to explain the anecdote, I don't know how much you followed the details of how Germany dealt with the increasing gas prices, but of course you understand the impulse that, I mean, you want to help the population. All of a sudden, your gas bill is much, much higher than it used to be before. Of course it makes sense that the government thinks about how to put aside money for that. Now, the one thing, however, you don't want to lose is the incentive mechanism embedded in prices, right? If prices go up, if it's all of a sudden very expensive to heat, maybe I abstain from my habit of opening the window for the fresh air and having the heating put on maximum or whatever people do. But I say, well, it's pretty expensive these days, maybe let's not do that. Now, if the government comes along and says, in December, don't worry, we're gonna pay your bill, incentives to be careful with your heating go down the drain. So, lots of economists spent lots of effort trying to explain that, you want to support, but ideally, I mean, what we economists would have really liked is a lump sum payment, and then you think about what you do with this. You can't quite convince the politicians, but they did something pretty close. They said, all right, we kind of pay December bill, but really you do pay for every marginal kilowatt hour of energy you're using. However, we pay you roughly 1/12 of your past bill, so that kind of amounts de facto to paying your December bill. But you still have all the incentives to kind of save energy, right? And it was really interesting to be involved in these discussions. I remember that at some point, how do you say, Staatssekretär, State Secretary? Okay.
Probably.
Yeah. Kind of paused and said, wow, but this is so complicated.
It is.
Why don't we just pay the December bill? And we're like, no. We have to keep the incentives to save energy. And now the same thing is happening again. This morning I did a Streitgespräch for the Handelsblatt, which might get published next week, about the Industriestrom, like specially subsidized electricity for industry. And the exact same thing. I mean, if you implement a 6 cent per kilowatt hour price, how do you implement it so that there's still incentives to kind of minimize how much energy you're using up for your production? It never stops.
Let's talk about the U.S. economy for a while. The U.S. The Fed is trying to control inflation through interest rate hikes, aiming for a so-called soft landing. This week we learned that the U.S. inflation was around 4%. Has the Fed done a good job?
Well, there was an interesting debate when inflation started taking off, and you could really see the writing on the wall, and not just, particularly in Europe, we talk a lot about energy prices, and then there's food inflation, it's all very volatile, but if you take the rest, the so-called core inflation, it had been taking off for a while. However you want to explain it, the fiscal impulses, the checks that were sent around to us, or whatever else might have been going on. It was quite visible for a while, and politicians weren't listening to that. They kept, writing checks without really thinking to whom are they going. And the Fed had this, I don't know if you remember that, there was this big debate about, it's just transitional. We have lived through the Great Moderation. For 10 years, nothing, inflation's never gone up, it's a little spike, it will go away. So I think you can say exposed, the reaction was too slow. I think now they've been doing what they expected to do, use the Fed funds rate to try to address that. And it's not quite working. I would not blame the Fed for that. I think, I don't want to get too technical, but with different instruments being used in monetary policy, with the economy having different players right now, It's just not working as well. But right now, I would think the Fed is doing a good job. It's just puzzling to realize how little effect it is having right now.
A German politician who served as close advisor to Chancellor Merkel for a long time once told me that he is glad that most CEOs of large DAX companies, German companies, act very responsibly. And then let's look to Silicon Valley. We can often encounter CEOs who act more like soccer stars versus the CEO of a company like Volkswagen.
So it doesn't always act how we want them to.
What is your observation? How do you explain that?
Again, you asked me for an explanation. I don't know whether I will get to the deep, ultimate explanation, but an observation is that here in the US, more broadly, I think in the Anglo-Saxon culture, this kind of superstar celebration of CEOs is different from what we know in continental Europe. You know, in Germany, I thought professors are superstars, but here, here it's instead if you go into the business world and start your company and you're successful there. That's good. That gives incentives to try to create something. The problem with the superstar system is what happens once you're on the top, and you have all sorts of liberties to do things you want to do. You have all sorts of demands to do certain things, and what I've observed, what I've studied, in fact, we just talked about it at the table in a paper about superstar CEOs, is that whenever this thing happened, so Business Week declares you CEO of the year, you're on the cover of magazines, that's the moment to short sell the stock, because from then on it just goes down the drain. It is, I mean, it's not just mean reversion, which is what the research is about, and you can see how these CEOs divert a lot of attention to, you know, writing books, playing golf, sitting on some boards, of course, is important, but, you know, there's a max when the corporate watchdogs get nervous, extracting a lot of salary, and actually only for them, not for their top team. So the superstar culture has advantages ex ante to get people into it and excited about creating something. I think it would be great if Germany had some of that. Once you are the superstar, we do need to pay a lot of attention to what they're doing.
You've studied how past experiences can shape inflation expectations and other economic conditions. How do you think this understanding can influence economic policy making?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics right now in research. So just to kind of set the scene here, as economists, typically when we're trying to predict, you know, anybody's investment behavior, savings behavior, job choices, marital choice, I mean, whatever we want to predict in our model, our baseline attitude is, let's just get all information we can get about you right now, right? Your income, wealth, education, your network of friends, etc. Maybe also some forward-looking information, like what's your employment, what are your employment prospects, your income prospects, etc. And then we're done. So then we can predict, you know, how you're going to behave more likely. And what I found instead is that your path to where you are today has an enormously long-lasting effect. So, you know, if we have two twin CEOs with the same earnings and prospects, etc., but one was born with the silver spoon in their mouth and the other one worked their way out of poverty, you will see the ramifications of having lived through these different experiences years after, decades after. And in some contexts, it's quite systematic. So the Germans are known for being very nervous about inflation, and that might have something to do that, you know, the country has experienced a hyperinflation way back when, which is still part of national memory, and then there was a war and currency was worth less again. You can see this in the data today. So you can take US data, you can look at people who have lived through the 70s, the stagflation, the oil price shocks, and you can look what they think inflation will be in the future, and they tend to be on the high end. I mean, even experts. It's not just the average Joe on the street, right? So you go to the FOMC, the Federal Reserve Board, and the governors, and ask them, as they're being asked to project what they think price development will be over the next year, you see their personal experience feeding into that. And that works for inflation, that works for stock prices. Ask any depression baby here in the US whether they like the stock market, that works for unemployment experiences. So it's super powerful what we have lived through. In the past, I'm emphasizing crisis, but you can also take the flip side, the good experiences, in terms of predicting our risk attitude, what we're interested in, what we will pursue. And that's something that's just not in the economic models a lot. So I remember after the financial crisis here in the US, data was looking good again in terms of productions, earnings, and so on. And the politicians were all like, well, but consumer optimism is still down, spending is still down. What's wrong with these people? They're kind of exactly like they were before the crisis, but they act differently. And I think that's what we have to learn, that we have to take with us. Predicting people's behavior is shaped by past experiences. Currently, I'm obviously very curious to learn more about who will be the COVID generation, Gen COVID, and how will it influence us going forward.
Just wanted to ask, that must have been an interesting period of time as well, because the US government pumped a lot of money into the market, and households had a lot of money that they were not able to spend in the past few years. So how will that change our behavior? What have you found out so?
There are two forces, right? On the one hand, there's a scarring of living through that crisis, and there was a lot of heterogeneity. So you can do it conditional on age group, depending on whether they are, say for kids, school were open or closed. Your parents were completely freaking out because they had 3 young boys at home and couldn't get a car at the moment, or maybe they had some more nicely behaved kids where it was less hard. There was a lot of heterogeneity in the experience for a given age group, and then of course across different age groups. So there's scarring experiences from that. In terms of financial implications, also huge heterogeneity. So you were emphasizing that some of us had stable jobs, plus we got the checks, and stayed at home, didn't have much opportunity to spend. So maybe if anything, our wealth accumulation looks better. Other people lost their job and endangered their health during this period. So I don't have for sure not for COVID-19, one size fits all type of conclusion, but there are lots of interesting studies happening in terms of job choices, right? The whole debate about the great resignation, about quiet quitting, conditional on having a job, CEOs and actually deans being desperate that they can't get their staff and people to come back to the offices to work, and they don't understand, well, conditions are the same as before. Why can't I negotiate that anymore? That is one of big question, how the workplace has changed. Mental health is a very big one, in particular for youth and children, and how it will affect their educational attainment and lifelong earnings. I've personally studied not COVID, but Ebola in Sierra Leone, and you see that there's this whole generation that has, until the end of their life, lower educational attainment, lower earnings, lower consumption spending. So that's what we are watching out for right now.
Let's talk about a lighter topic. When you're playing the game of finance and investing your hard-earned cash, please enlighten us. What's your guiding star, and could you slip us a golden nugget of advice for our own money moves?
I tend to be very boring and say always the same. And by the way, it's much more important to say
a savings
Germany,
account.
Which is, please invest in broadly diversified low-fee funds. Yeah, find your ETF, find your MSCI World, and just do the boring stuff, and instead put your effort into what you're good at doing, whether it's at your work or your hobbies, etc. Don't waste your money with fees and trying to beat the market.
Thank you so much, Professor Malmendier.